I'm going to start out with telling you about my relatives that first came here. My great grandmother and great grandfather on my mom's side came from Iowa in a covered wagon in 1880. Or on my mother's father's side, they came from Colorado in 1887, still in a covered wagon train. And so um, they homesteaded on Sunday. My grandpa Otto, Jean Pierre Ismer, and his wife Catherine, they homesteaded about 4 miles up here on Sundown. And they also bought the place on the South Bank Road here where I live. And that, I call that the ranch. So whenever you hear me say the ranch, that's what I'm talking about. It's a little bit over a mile up the South Bank Road here. And my other great grand folks homesteaded on the little South Fork of Hunter Street. That would be Jerry Metzger, and her husband Gus. I went to school in Gold Beach, but when I graduated from Gold Beach, I spent as much time as I possibly could down here growing up. And after high school, I moved down here permanently, or semi-permanent, yes. Which, as a young kid, this place was the best playground you can imagine. Fishing, swimming, farm life, never a dull moment. And I remember trying to help Grandma Nelma Ismer with the chores. And she taught me how to milk a cow. And, we fed the ducks and chickens and stuff like that. So we were probably a little bit of a help and probably some nuisance. The one thing that we didn't have here as kids were financial worries. So that made it even more fun for us. Tasting River is a very spiritual place. And it always has been. Some of the places that I can name that really are very spiritual for me. Red Rock is about a 200-foot tall rock that is behind the ranch. The Madrone Ring is a ring of madrone trees that is on top of a rock also. And the Flint Rock. Flint Rock is where the natives got their material for chipping points. And it's not really flint, it's chert. But I did bring an arrow with the chert point on it so people can look at that. And of course, the source of Pistol River. And Pistol River comes bubbling up out of the ground. It's like an artesian, I guess it is an artesian well, up on the slope of below Sugarloaf Mountain. And it's hard to find. I've been there a few times myself. And whenever I go there, I drink as much of that water as I can. It's a pool about maybe 2 feet in diameter and 2 feet deep, and it's just crystal clear and cold water. If you go down a couple hundred feet from that, it looks like a miniature river. There's gravel bars on each side, little tiny trees, rather cute. But if you go down another half a mile from there, it's like 30-foot waterfalls, treacherous, slippery. And I've walked from the source to the ocean once, and I've walked from about 80% of that twice, once with my brother Les in the 80s, and once with my son Ben in the 90s. And from that point, you're kind of almost out of the waterfalls, but still it's very treacherous. You're always crossing the river. You wear wading shoes and cutoffs and just figuring on getting wet and bruised up. I'll tell you one little story. When my brother Les and I went down to the 80s, we didn't figure on our packs getting wet or anything, so we didn't cover them with garbage bags or whatever. But it takes about 4 days, and it's about 18 miles long, the whole river. But Les and I made our way down, and we came to this one spot where there's a boulder, and we got down to the boulder, but on both sides of the river, it's steep and covered in poison oak. And so it looked like it was maybe 5 feet deep. And so I put my pack above my head and stepped off a boulder. It was really 12 feet deep. It's very exceeding because it was so crystal clear. Storm. Yes. And so Les watched me do this. I drug my pack, swam my pack over the gravel bar. They started laying everything out. And Les says, I don't think I'm going to go. So back and went back up the river and around on these steep face rocks. And I showed up about 45 minutes later with a broken finger and cracked ribs. Just part of the deal. I've been upside down in Pistol River with my pack on, but it's summertime. As long as you don't smash your head or break a leg, you're okay. Big trout in there. We came upon a pool with giant rainbow trout. I don't think they're there anymore. Last time I walked down, I didn't see them. They're 2 feet long. They look like salmon. And we did catch, I think, maybe 1 or 2 16-inchers for dinner. But those big trout, they wouldn't bite. They would come up. We'd have a little number 2 MEPs, and cast it out there. And the big trout would come up like that, real close to the surface with their mouths just gaping, and then they'd zero. And as my dad said, they didn't get that big by being stupid. And then we always see a lot of critters. Foxes, bobcats, something, one-time cougar, and bear, lots of bear. I've got a bunch of bear stories from Pistol River area. But there are some animals here. There are some animals that are not here anymore that used to be here. The ring-tailed cat. Haven't seen a ring-tailed cat. Or the Pacific giant salamanders used to be in all these creeks. We haven't seen one of those for a long time. Golden eagles. Used to see them all the time, but I think maybe the reason they're not here so much or we don't see them now is because there aren't so many sheep here, and they used to eat on the ditch. So that kind of makes sense. But the other thing is lampreys. We used to have to swim around we call them eels, and they used to just be thick in the rivers here. And yeah. And I've seen one in the last 4 years. That was a Hunter's Creek. But they would come up in the rivers in the summer and spawn, and then they would die. And they would kind of sink down into these pools where we'd swim. We'd have to swim around the eels all the time. And it was just part of swimming on these rivers. It wasn't any big deal. Now we have crawdads in the river, and we have opossums everywhere. So somebody said that the opossums aren't so bad because they really eat the ticks. So maybe that's okay. We also don't have anymore, we don't have feral goats or feral pigs. And they used to be very prevalent, especially pigs. The goat herds, there were a couple of them behind the ranch. And I remember walking up to Red Rock, which is one of my very special places, one time. And I came upon this herd of goats. There was maybe a dozen in there. And it was in the spring, so the creek was running pretty loud. And I came through the trees, and there they were. This herd of goats. These feral animals were brought here by the pioneers, and they let them open range because they weren't going to fence them in, and then they would gather them when they needed to. But I came on these goats. There was maybe a dozen in the herd, and then there was one billy goat watching over the herd. But they were all facing away from me. And they didn't hear me come up because the creek was loud, and I think the wind was in my favor also. So I watched them for a few minutes, and they were grazing and working their way to the creek away from me. And so this one billy goat, the horns on these billy goats were amazing. The goats themselves were 2.5, 3 feet tall. They were pretty short, but the horns they came out of the skull about 4 inches. And by the time they reached the top, they spiraled around, and they were maybe like 1.5 feet apart. And so this billy goat was grazing there and keeping an eye on his herd. And being a kid, I thought, I wonder how close I can get to this. So as he took a bite of grass, I would take a very slow step, and I would freeze as he brought his head up, and he would look around. And the next time he took a bite, I would take another step. And I got really close to him. I got like 6 feet away from him. And he just was busy keeping his attention on his flock. And then I thought to myself, if I lunge at him, I bet I can touch him. I was maybe I was smarter that day. I didn't do that. So at that point, I think maybe he sensed me. I don't think the wind changed. I think he just sensed me. And he swung. First of all, he was by this big 20-foot rock, and off the rock came the soil and the grass. Pretty steep, maybe like 45 degrees. So he swung his head around and looked at me when he sensed me. And he freaked out, swung his head back around to run away, and one of his horns stuck in the dirt. And it made him fall on his side, and he started kicking his feet in the air like that. And of course, I wasn't going to get in there and help him. So then after maybe 2 or 3 seconds, he gets up and takes off, and about 25 feet away from me, he turns around and looked at me, and I could just see the look on his face. Was like, man, how did that human get so close to me? He learned a valuable lesson. Now, the feral pigs, they were a different story. They did a lot of damage, and they were always exciting to run into in the woods. Sow with piglets or the boar. Usually, almost always they ran away. One time my cousin Dale got treed by a boar. But they really rooted up the ground and did a lot of damage that way. They also would eat the young lambs sometimes. So I think what happened was, well, first of all, tell this story. I was living, this was 1970. I was living in a tent at that point, and down at the ranch, and Bill Crook drives up in his pickup, and he gets out with his dog. I think it was a border collie, and we're talking there in the morning, and then he reaches in and he grabs a lariat, and I said, "What are you going to do, Bill?" And he says, "I'm going up and catch one of these boars that's hanging out above your place." And I'm thinking, I want to watch this. Doing this with a rope. And so we all walked up the hill, and about 3/4 from the top of the hill, there's this boar. And so Bill sends his dog in there. The boar wasn't on the road. He was up above the road. Bill sends his dog in there, and the dog herds this wild boar pig down onto the road. Now, these pigs and the goats too, I think, after being wild for so many generations. They got really hairy again, and their tusks sometimes full curl around. In fact, I brought some to show people. These boar tusks were killed on the ranch at Tuscaloosa. But this was an amazing thing to watch, because the dog kept this pig really busy. The pig was trying to sidestep and get around him and go up the hill, but the dog would do the same thing, and kept him in this one spot. And we were maybe 20 or 30 feet below him on the road. So as he's doing this, Bill was able to loop one of the hind legs on this pig and take him down the hill with the dog keeping the head busy. And he wasn't dragging him. He was walking him backwards down the hill. And I thought, man, if that dog got hurt, or if he decided I don't want to do this anymore, Bill's going to be in a world of hurt. But that didn't help. That didn't happen. So he got him all the way down the hill and in his pickup. Right. So, but I think all the ranchers kind of decided this at once, because after that, I didn't see any pigs. They used to be all over the place. Casate Creek, up the Rogue River, down into California, especially here, they were just big. So he then took this pig over to the corrals and the barn where the sheep shooting used to happen, and put it in with these other pigs that they caught. And I walked over there and looked at them, and there was like 30 or 40 of these wild pigs that they caught. And they fattened them up and butchered some of them, and sold others for butcher. But what an impressive thing to see that dog work, especially. One other little story about wild animals. Again, my brother Les and I were hiking up to Red Rock, and I think I must have been 17 and Les was 15. And we heard this really bizarre noise. And it was maybe half a mile away. And so we walked toward it, and it changed as we got closer. First, it sounded like an elk, possibly. And as we got closer, the timbre of it changed, and it sounded like maybe a pig squealing. And then we got closer and closer, and then it was just very confusing, because it didn't sound like anything I'd ever heard before. And so we came around this corner, and it was a big sow bear. And she had two cubs. One of them caught in a coyote trap, and the other one was free, but they were both screaming at the same time. And that was the sound we heard. And it was two dissonant screams that was very eerie. So we hid, Les and I hid behind a tree, and then couldn't really see the one caught in the trap. I wanted to get a better look at him. So I got up to the next tree, and then I could see he was caught in the trap. And that was about the time the sow started sensing me. And she got up on her hind legs, and her nose was in the air. And she was, before that, she'd been woofing and snorting and growling and all this stuff. But anyway, she smelled me, or both of us, went down to all fours, took off down the hill with the one cub that was not in the trap. And so, waited for a few minutes, and then I thought, I wonder if I could go down there real fast and turn that cub loose. And there again, it must have been one of my smarter days. Didn't do that. We went back down to the ranch, and I called the Fish and Game, and they sent two guys out, and I went up with them. We were able to drive actually right to where the bear cub was caught. And one guy had a rifle just in case the sow came back and wanted to kill us. And I held the cub down. The cub was maybe 1.5 feet long. It's a very little cub. And the other guy opened the trap and turned it loose and just scampered down the hill like nothing. had ever happened. And it had been there for 10 hours, double, at least. Wow. So I wanted to talk a little bit about my grandma, Elizabeth. She was my biggest influence growing up. I loved her. And she came down to this area in 1914 in a covered wagon still. And it took 12 days. They came from the Willamette Valley, somewhere around Salem. And she said that it was a nice trip. It was nice weather. It was in May, so they got into some mud holes and got bogged down pretty good. But her mother, Carrie Metzges, and her siblings were on that little covered wagon trip from Salem down to here, down to the little South Fork of Hunter's Creek, actually. And her mother, Carrie Metzges, my great-grandmother, said it was a really fun trip, and it reminded her of coming across the plains in 1880. Whenever I would go away for a month or maybe 2 months, I would come back, and my grandma, Elma, and I would go out in the woods, and she would kind of guide me to pick all these wild things to eat. And so it would be like stinging nettles, skunk cabbage, watercress, wild onions, that type of thing. Then we would go home, and she would cook me up this fantastic meal of all wild stuff. And she would also throw in some canned venison or canned salmon too. But it was just such a wonderful thing. And one of the really fun things that I remember doing as a kid here was, before the highway was in, she would cook up a pan of fudge, and we would cross the river just at the ranch. We would cross the river just this side of downriver where the old bridge used to be. That bridge was torn out in 1951, the year I was born. So I never did see that bridge, but we were able to wade that little area. It was an easy place to wade the river. And then we would get on the north bank and walk down to the Pistol River store. And she would do some visiting and get her mail. And then we would walk south on this road here to what is now the South Pistol River exit. Like I say, the highway wasn't in then. But there were trails. And we would go out into the sand dunes and play all day. And we would be able to just jump off these 20-foot sand dune cliffs and go in the air flying and come down and not get hurt. And we would find all these shell nibbles and get to explore those and find pieces of flint or chert, chippings from arrow points, bones sometimes, lots of shells, different kinds of shells. And then when I graduated from high school, I got a cassette recorder for my graduation. And I used that to do interviews with my grandma. And those are treasured now. I really encourage any of you young kids here in the line. Now, my great-grandma, Grandma Metzges, I knew her. She was born in 1866. And for me to think about that, it's just mind-bending to know somebody that was born in 1866. And I remember her telling stories about coming across the plains in 1880. She was 13, almost 14. And the main thing I remember was her telling about the Indians, but she did tell about other stories too, happenings and wagon train. How much time do we have? I've got some things about 1960 and 61 about the Chetawesson dig over here, the trail ride to Brookings, some other things, dugout canoe that was found down here at the mouth of the river, and I think might still be up at the fairgrounds. It's strong.
I think it's at the museum across the street from the fairgrounds.
Okay.
Yeah.
Am I done? Oh.
Yeah. Except that, remind them you're going to show them those things
Yes.
later.
On this table, I have an arrow made from chert from the flintlock. And also in here, and you all can come and look at them. You can take them out and fondle them if you want. The tusks from the wild boar that was killed on the ranch here. So that's one of the bottom tusks. And this is one of the top tusks, and they work together to keep them sharp. So they grind against each other, and they would keep the edge on the teeth. Yeah. And in this one here are some pictures of the Chettle Lessington dig that Ron was talking about over here above Henry's Rock. And there are pictures in there of the skeletons in the corners, and that to me was a very important thing to do in my own videos. So I have extra copies of that if you want to take some. And also I have one more thing. I have copies of the CD that of a song that I had written for Mom. And I've got a number of copies here if anybody wants any of those.
And we'll play it when we can.
Okay. Thank you very much.